about scale and proportion in our home. Hi everyone, it's Carol from Discover Interior Design, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, in this video, we are going to talk about what to think about when we are noticing and working with scale and proportion in our home. And first thing is, what are scale and proportion? Well, they are both interior design principles, which just means they are part of the guide that we use to follow so that we make sure that our home, our rooms that we're designing are going to be both functional as well as beautiful. And scale and proportion both kind of have to do with size, but kind of in different ways. Scale has to do with relationships between a standard size. So for instance, furniture is made to scale in relationship to human size so that we can sit in a chair. So everything is designed around our sizes and making sure that furniture is in scale with our human body size. And proportion has to do with size as well, but it's more of a relative way of thinking about size. We could look at a room and say, oh, that room is a very large scale size of room. But we could also notice that that fireplace is actually really large scale and a very big size as well. And we could say that fireplace, the design of that fireplace, is in proportion to the largeness or that large scale of that room. So in our home, there are a couple ways that you can think about working with scale and proportion and noticing scale and proportion, and kind of different ways to think about it. The first way is just to think about the size of things and the relationship between one element, one thing and another thing, and basing everything on a similar scale or size. So for instance, that could be maybe a bed in a bedroom, and you would ideally, so that your bedroom looks and feels balanced, that there's a sense that everything kind of works together and everything is cohesive, that you would want to kind of look at your bed and get a sense of, is this bed a large scale size of bed, or is it a smaller, more delicate size of bed? And then when you would want to choose maybe bedding to go with your bed, that's what you would kind of keep in mind. So for instance, if you had a large scale size of bed, it would make sense to choose bedding that would have a more larger scale pattern on it, because that would kind of match in a way or make more sense with the large scale size of your bed. Because if you chose something that was a more delicate or smaller scale or smaller size of a pattern, it may just look too dainty or too small to go with the large scale size of your bed. And another thing to think about is maybe looking for nightstands to go next to your bed. Well, it would make sense to find nightstands that kind of match that scale, would be in proportion with your bed size. And I also talked about this in my video on choosing a bedside table lamp size. We talked about proportion and scale and how to think about that when you want to choose a bedside lamp that makes sense with your bed and your bedside table. And I'll leave a link to that video in this video's description if you want to find out more information on that. But really, we want to think about using scale and proportion in a way where everything kind of makes sense together, that things don't look out of place, that things are making sense and that they look and feel cohesive just based on how the sizes relate to one another. And then another way to think about scale and proportion in a room is having to do kind of with a range of proportions. So what I mean by that is, say in an open concept room where you have your kitchen and a dining room area and a living room area, and you are choosing architectural lighting for that room. So architectural lighting, the lighting that would be attached to our ceiling where it would become part of your home. And so when we are thinking about changing out all of the different lighting in a room, maybe you're remodeling your home or just want to switch things out, you of course want to think about size and scale and thinking about finding a chandelier that would go over your table that would kind of make sense with the size and scale of your dining room table. And same thing with putting any type of lighting, say, over a kitchen island, having pendant lights that would make sense with the size and scale of that kitchen island. And the other thing to think about when we're thinking about size and scale, there may be a range of different proportions of size and scale with, say, architectural lighting in a room. And what I mean by that is that we would want to have one of the light fixtures, our chandelier over the dining room table, be probably one of the larger light fixtures in that collection of lighting, just because that would be a really important feature in our room. And we'd want to have that chandelier be a larger size, making sense with the size of the table, but being almost like a focal area in your room. Whereas the lights over, say, at a kitchen island would be smaller, to the point where you could put 2 or 3 of them together to fill up that space. Could we put a chandelier over above the kitchen island? Yes, we could, based on size and scale. Island could almost be the size of a dining room table, but we wouldn't necessarily want to put the same size of light fixture over the island as we do over the dining room table. We just want to have maybe a ratio of different types of focal areas, different types of visual weight in the room, where maybe the dining room table is the main focal area and it has the largest size of light fixture. And then at the island, it has smaller light fixtures. It's not the main prominent focal area. It's still a really important area, but we want it to be a little less prominent than the dining room table. And we're talking about visual weight. So visual weight just has to do with how heavy or light something looks to us. Focal areas are a good example where we want to have the most visual weight, and just because of the size of something, that gives something more visual weight. Whereas on, say, over by a kitchen island, those pendant lights are smaller than that larger chandelier, and they have a little less or lighter visual weight. So that's just something to keep in mind with scale and proportion. There may be a range of different sizes and having everything in scale with one another, but different proportions of how large or how small something will be so that it makes sense with the room. And then another way you can think about scale and proportion is if you want to change the illusion of how large or how small something is, or how large or small a room is. So, for instance, we can change the look and feel of a bathroom, and just by using a larger scale of tile on the walls in a bathtub or shower surround. What's going on is that those tiles, we could almost say they're kind of out of scale or out of proportion with the size of that bathroom because they're very large. But what's happening is that we're using them in a way where it's giving us the sense that maybe this room is a little larger. We are using them in a way where we call it a field of tile, which just means that we just want to have an overall background look to a wall. We are not looking at creating a lot of pattern or a lot of different movement. We just want to create almost like just a big area that we look at. And if we use a larger size of a tile, say in a bathroom, that means it gives us the illusion that maybe that bathroom is larger. Because if we use a smaller scale of tile, which may be in better proportion with the room, but it's going to break up the room a little bit more, or break up those areas, even though it's still maybe a field of those tiles, but it's going to break it up a little bit more often, whereas a big tile won't break up that wall space as much or as often. So you can use scale and proportion to kind of play with the illusion that a room or an area of the room is maybe larger or smaller than it really is. And then another way to think about using scale and proportion is to use it to help you create a balanced look in a room. And I want to show you two different examples of this and how we can kind of think about that and kind of notice scale and proportion. This first room, we could call it very large scale room, very tall and very long and very big. And there are some really important features that are kind of supporting that. There are very dark, heavy beams in the ceiling that draw our eyes up to the height of this very tall room. Then they have the very strong, prominent feature of that fireplace, that stone surround that goes all the way up to the ceiling and really draws our eyes to that area. It's a very prominent area in the room, and it helps to emphasize the height of that room. And in a way, we could say the architect or the builder who designed this room was thinking of that. That fireplace is in proportion with that room. Something smaller may not work in that room. But how do we bring some sense of livability or balance to that room? Because we want to feel comfortable in there and enjoy hanging out in this room. So how do we do that when we have this room that is very tall and has very strong features that take up a lot of visual weight? Well, one thing that's kind of happening, which I think is kind of interesting, is on the fireplace, there are areas where that verticality, that verticalness of the fireplace is starting to be broken up, where it's starting to bring our eyes lower into the room. One of them is just the fireplace mantle itself and the artwork and other items that are on that mantle. And right away, it kind of breaks up that very tall vertical look of the fireplace and kind of bringing it down to a lower area where we can relate to it even more. And then just where the fireplace opening is, that's another area where it breaks it up again. And so helps to kind of connect that fireplace to the floor and to the area where we're going to be hanging out. And the other thing that's happening in the room to kind of help bring everything down to our level, there are sconces on the wall, and then they also have a living room furniture arrangement happening in the room. But is this the most successful way of really creating a livable space in that room where there's more of a balance happening in that room? One thing I notice in this room is that, yes, there's furniture down in the room, but all of that furniture, and it's kind of larger scale furniture, which is good because it kind of makes sense with the large scale of this room, is all in a light color. And one thing about visual weight is that we can create more visual weight when we work with color, or more importantly, with value. And value has to do with the lightness and darkness of something. Usually, something that is lighter is going to have a lighter visual weight, whereas something that is darker, a darker color or a darker finish, is going to have more heavier visual weight. One thing that is working well, that's actually maybe a good starting point for this room if they could just redo everything, is that area rug, because the area rug has some darker tones in it, and it actually has some patterns and it kind of draws our attention and kind of helps to anchor that entire seating arrangement. What may be helpful to help kind of stabilize that entire area is to bring in some darker toned furniture. The other thing that maybe could help this room to kind of help bring it in to make it more comfortable and livable is maybe painting the walls a little bit darker. It doesn't have to be super dark, but just something that maybe helps to bring in a more cozy look to the space. And this room may be a better example of how we can do that, how we can use scale and proportion to help balance things out and how to create a more livable, comfortable space in a room that can be kind of overpowering because it is very tall. This room has a similar thing going on as the other room where it's very tall and they have a fireplace area, a feature area where they have a very prominent fireplace wall with that stone fireplace. But one thing that's happening in this room right away to help kind of break up that verticalness of that room is there are different things going on. There's a staircase, and the railing and the balustrade on the staircase are breaking up the verticality of that room. We also can notice that the shelving and even the fireplace itself, they don't go all the way up to the ceiling. They actually stop at a certain point. So that kind of stops our eyes from going all the way up to the ceiling. The other thing that's happening, the fireplace does have a mantle on it, which starts to break up that verticalness of the fireplace, as well as the fireplace opening. The other thing that is happening in this room is that we get a sense of stability and groundedness just because they're using maybe some darker tone furniture and a variety of different larger pieces of furniture that would be in scale with this room and in scale with one another. And all of that together creates a more stable, grounded look to this room, where the vertical nature of this room is broken up, where we're using maybe some darker tones on the furniture and a pattern on the area rug and larger scale pieces of furniture. Everything that kind of makes sense with the largeness of that room. And all of that together helps to create a more grounded and stable, more comfortable, livable area in this room compared to the other room. And is this room perfect? Well, maybe there's some things that we could do to this room to have it look and feel a little bit more better in scale and proportion. One thing I would think about is changing out that mantle, because I think that mantle, you have this very large stone fireplace. Well, I think there is an opportunity to design a mantle that's maybe larger scale and more in proportion with that fireplace. And I'd love to find out from you if you have any other ideas about how we could add more of a balanced look while we think about scale and proportion in either of these rooms. So please share your design ideas in the comments. And let me know if you have any questions about this topic or any other suggestions on what to think about when we're thinking about scale and proportion in our homes. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.